Thank you very much for a very insightful and very concise overview of this research. I have filtered through the document, and it's getting everything on paper and getting all that research that I'm sure must have gone through getting those numbers out was the challenge, and it was done in a way that I find very engaging and not too overwhelming. I do have questions, but before that, I'd like to open up the floor to any of the listening participants if they have any questions for our two authors here. You are also free to unmute your mic to ask. You don't need to write it down on the group chat.
Or raise your hand.
Can we also see the group chat? Yes. If not, I am happy to kick it off with a few questions from my side. The first is this study, as someone who also works in the team, I know that this study is a second edition from an earlier study in 2015, creating the value of open data.
True.
So what, for one, is there a major difference between this study, or the findings of the 2015 study and your current research? And what are the key differences, if there are any, between the two? It's 5 years apart.
True.
Well, let me get started on that one. I think that the 2015 report has some very, very good insights already. And I think that we have a similar approach, but we have updated it in several different ways. Also, because at the time, 2015, the status of open data was just like less mature than it is right now. So in this the newest report, we had access to a much more broader amount of research that we could also take into consideration. And I think that in terms of the bottom-up approach, so more the examples, they're just different. So you can't really compare it to last year, but I think in terms of the open data market size, the open data jobs that are created, there is some way of reflecting back to it. And if you read the report, you can also see it for yourself. And I think it's quite clearly marked what the differences are. So that at least I really hope that that's clear in the report.
Well, maybe I can add one thing on that, is that we in a way treated the report from 2015, of course, as an inspiration, but we treated it also a little bit as all the other reports that we were looking at. So we were really challenging the methodology we used 5 years ago and the data we used 5 years ago, just as we did with, for example, a few studies from McKinsey and BCG. So I think we looked at a multitude of studies, and I would even dare to say we kind of included all relevant studies. And for example, for the KPI market size, we included each and every study that is higher than city level or region level and calculates market size of open data. And I think there may be around 15 or 20 studies, and we compared them all, made them comparable. So in this report, it bundles much more research that has been done in the last 5 and also 10 years. And this is definitely something that differs from the report in 2015, because it just didn't really have the chance, because there was much less. So in a way, we are way more informed, way more overwhelmed, one could say. And we had to be more critical because there were more sources available. But as this is a difficult research and the research approach is very complex, we had to be critical with the methodologies of others and really had to take into account what are strengths and weaknesses of sources and in which way can we rely on those numbers. So
I also think that we really try to put our credo in there as well, really about being as accurate as possible, while at the same time being very transparent about maybe certain limitations to the other researches that we have used, but mostly really being clear how we have taken them into consideration, and being modest about the let's say, conclusions that we can draw from it. yeah.
Yeah.
So let's lead to two questions tied to each other. Firstly, how did you decide to focus on these specific areas? Why did you decide to focus on the health, the environment, this part of the energy sector? Why the solar panels? Why about CPR, malaria in the health sector?
Very good question. I started off very, with a very broad scope, and I would have wished I would have the time to research all of those things that I had in mind. But in the end, I had to narrow it down, which makes sense because you kind of also we want to give the reader a variety of different examples that we could use, but we cannot make 50 more pages of different examples, I would say. Next time maybe. But I think we try to focus on things that are important to society. So I think saving time is such a general thing that almost anyone could benefit from. Saving lives, of course, we try to look at, let's say, the steps of which things that emergencies that happen. So we also looked at, okay, how can we decrease the time that it takes for an ambulance to actually arrive, and what can we do in the meantime? We are also, well, a little bit on the topic of diseases that spread. We wanted to take that one into consideration, and there was such a really nice example in the malaria case that you mentioned. So we included that as well. And the environmental benefits is something that's just really important, and it's also getting more attention on worldwide, but also European level. And then we also wanted to look at how knowledge can be transferred more in Europe, in terms of having more translation services, and by that way enabling the transfer of knowledge better.
That leads to the next question, because now it's a bit clear, at least for me, how and why you selected these areas. And for me, what's interesting is for example, the last 3 slides you showed, each point had numbers. How did you get these numbers and could do this qualitative research in deciding that, okay, open data market size, 184.45 billion open data markets in 2019, and what it's forecasted to grow in a few years? Can you explain just a bit of the more in-depth process?
Well, that's a tough question, actually. It's even hard to bring that on paper, but to explain it without boring the audience. What's maybe best to share is that pretty general in research around the open data market size is that we link it to GDP, or the GBA that adds value to GDP. So we were working a lot with the basis of what was the GDP in the year where different studies were conducted. What would that mean for the current GDP? So that makes it comparable. So speaking in percentages of GDP seems to be like the lingua franca, right? The kind of the language, how we can compare those different studies. So we also want to, of course, use this language because it makes sense, or this currency, and express our findings in percentage of GDP that then can be expressed as a total amount of money. But it also makes sense because it's regardless of, or more or less regardless of the number of countries that we include, because total numbers change a lot. That we see with different constellations of the EU member states, of course, the total numbers change a lot and would give us the view that either it's decreasing or increasing the open data market size, while the share of GDP could show us a different picture. And this is why we chose this way of expressing it, and using growth rates beyond the fluctuations in GDP that help us to forecast the market size for 2025. I think that's in terms of scope, best selection.
It's a succinct answer, and it also targets exactly what I had asked for. There are several examples, and I'm sure that not a lot of the examples we want to focus on were easy to get information on. But that leads to my next question. Do you think we, as a society or as a public institution, as a government, as businesses, should put more effort into opening up data that is not open yet, but could be made open, not just for this kind of research, but for different applications, researches, and projects?
Two or three answers. I try to put it in one. Well, I'm a big believer in the concept of open data, and what's public and what can be open should be made open. And this is also what we are aiming for and what we have been doing for the last 5 and longer years with the member states. I'm also a big fan of the impact that can be created with this data, if open or not. So what I'm hoping is that with a high value data sets that are about to be selected, and maybe there will be different rounds of doing that, that we will have important data, not just open and a better quality, but maybe also the scope of data, so new data sets will be opened. But this is of course complex, and because they are not open yet for a reason, for lack of resources, for ethical or legal concerns. So I must say that I'm getting more and more open to the idea of not opening data to convey and perceive the open data principles. So we want transparency, accountability, responsibility, and we want to create impact with the data. And if that in short term can be reached by other data sharing agreements, I think that is perfectly fine. And I can understand that a few open data enthusiasts now scream and really heavily disagree with me, and that's totally great as well. I believe looking at data holistically and saying, this is open already. Here we have, for example, with company registered, we have a lot of problems, legal concerns, ethical concerns. We cannot come to a European-wide consent in the short term. Well, how can we then set up a data sharing approach which is in line with the open principles to that degree that we create transparency, accountability, equal access to knowledge and to opportunities, for example, to small, medium enterprises and to research. If that is still ensured, then I would be open to not open in the short term.
Huh.
Open to not open.
Not sure if that one is a
No, and I just to make a slight addition to your answer, I also think that it's very important to remember that these, at least for the bottom-up approach, these examples and the calculations that we made, they are potential that could be reached. So we're not there yet. Like, we should work towards having more data either open or in any other way or form that is suitable to be able to reach this potential. And I think that's something that we should strive for. Yeah,
that's very true. We can get easily excited about all the impact that Laura is sharing with us, and that we know that can be there, forgetting that we are not there. The potential is there, but there's of course work to do. And with the, let's say, the open data movement life cycle, it's very important now to also bring out the message, yes, the potential is great, but we cannot just lean back and relax now, because we are far from there.
And I think that also another addition, it's also not solely about having the data available, because nowadays there is already a lot of data also available, but there should also be efforts made to increase, let's say, the level of discoverability. So making it easier for reusers to really find the right thing and not just finding a bunch of information available. I think that's
well, that's hopefully about to happen. Yeah.
You're really great at leading me to my next questions, though, so I'm going to keep doing that. And this links back more into the 7 key learnings that everyone can see on the screen, because you mentioned more that you had examples of tailored approaches for people. I'm going to let you rethink where exactly that was said, because my question is, when you mentioned these tailored approaches, was how did you come up with them? Because Europe is quite, looking at Europe as and even beyond, the societies, the different governments, the different institutions, different businesses, the different communities are all quite different in how they use, work with, share, and interact or know open data. So in these tailored approaches, what?
Well, we are a little bit in between, right? We are the European data portal, so we are thriving for European-wide solutions and for equality across Europe. And we map countries based on their open data maturity to find out where are challenges, especially for those countries still being a little bit more behind in their open data maturity. But yeah, we're looking at Europe holistically, but not being agnostic to the different challenges, not just in countries, but in regions and in sectors. And personally, I think we can do much more there, because open data seems to get more and more local and less European-wide. Users start looking for open data on local portals. Maybe this is great. I think that shows that we have done a great job, and by we, I mean the whole open data community, of course, creating more awareness for open data and making reusers aware where they can find open data to help us, or to help them answer their challenges. So when we say open data reuse is becoming more local, of course the local specification and characteristics become more interesting. How can we, or how can Europe or European Data Portal, the European Commission help at this specific local level? I think that will be something to look in the future, reacting to the reusers changing behaviors. And how can we still be of good support? And that, I think, will continue with reaching out to the community, maybe including local and regional communities, that's what we already do. And we can do that more. And try to really understand local challenges, like we did with urban versus rural open data. So these topics are coming up. And so the call for more tailored approaches, as you said, tailored open data reuse or data sharing approaches is coming, and also the more sector-specific view. I hope that answers your question.
That's my question. Thank you very much. Next one for me is, because now we talk about the potential about these approaches and about how this built off the previous studies, not just the 2015 one. What are the next steps on the research into open data, not just on the economic impact of open data?
You mean we are not done? I thought we were done now. What not to research? It's
let's bring it down a notch and say what. Well, for one, on both of yourselves, as someone who is, as two people who've been super invested in this the past few months, what would you, with the means and resources, have researched next, or would recommend that others research next, either building off this report or the landscape?
Okay, one thing that would be amazing is if we could bring whole of Europe, all businesses, to a Europe-wide questionnaire to understand more about the actual situation. Because what we can do with the survey we did and the literature research we did, and analyzing the best practices and good practices, we can only get so close. And there will always be this vagueness of guesstimations where we can be as accurate and as precise and deep diving as possible. In the end, most of it stays a little bit vague. And this is utopian, because I think it's not even possible. But if a research that would go for years, and I don't even think it's possible, but that would be great to understand, okay, to get a better grasp at what's really going on. But that would involve all organizations. And I mean, we've been talking to many stakeholders that share this dream. Because once you get into the methodology of calculating it, the limitations that just cannot be overcome easily. I think frustrating for every researcher, and overcoming this, that would be something I would totally sign up for. So economic impact of open data, full-time, 200 people, 3 years, and then I would go for that. But there are other smaller topics that deserve, for example, like we said, how are reusers changing? Is open data reuse getting more local? These are absolutely great topics to look at. What is the future of open data portals? Or the whole topic around open and shared that I brought into here. These are topics for me.
Yeah, I actually completely agree. I think that getting a better sense of what the needs are, so from the open data reuses, that will be definitely something very interesting. And on the other hand, something else is, okay, we have been giving multiple examples, giving the potential that could be created. Like, how can we research a sort of strategic plan on how to realize that potential as fast as possible, how to get there and make it practical in a way.
Yeah, and that's very holistic again, right? But what I think would also be great is just doing this in 5 years again, because then we will see the effects of high-value data sets. Digitization will be more evolved, and of course the efforts of the Commission and many other stakeholders around digital skills are also picking up. And I believe when we are more mature in digital ways of working, open data value creation will pick up massively. So I think we should keep on doing this, monitoring this, and see what we find out, what's important.
Excellent. That was a difficult question to answer as well.
Yeah, so, but a good one. I like it.
I open up the floor, or otherwise I will ask at least my set of last questions. So I invite people to unmute themselves and speak, or just type and ask. Otherwise, yeah. 1 second.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes, a little bit far away, but yes.
Okay, otherwise I will write down. I have a question in terms of, I don't know if you had a sense of the level of data literacy of companies you have interviewed for your survey, or people. I mean, it's interesting to know if companies are ready to work on open data and to leverage potential of this open data in all level. I mean, big companies or even small, medium companies. I don't know if you had a sense of this in your research.
Mm-hmm. Good question, thank you, Matteo. And there are also different ways to answer, and I'll answer with a small story. So when we were setting up our survey to the companies, we were working on reaching out to 2,500 companies, and we made a whole plan of how this can be like best spread geographically, but also between SMEs and big companies and different sectors. So we reached out to more than 2,500 companies with a really short questionnaire and with a powerful name of the European Commission to invite them to briefly talk about data and open data. And we got we got three responses. And this for me already answers part of this question. I mean, we could say basically maybe people are just like too lazy or don't have enough time to reply to those questionnaires. Other questionnaires work better. So I had the feeling just randomly targeting companies with the topic of open data creates hesitation. So I have the feeling open data is not there yet. There is not enough awareness around open data in the companies. So what we did afterwards is we had the same survey, but we just opened the link for everyone. And then we got lots of responses. But obviously, these people or these organizations and companies that are a little bit more mature around open data and want to share their knowledge, their status, they're more likely to reply. I mean, that's also why this survey is biased. And in those results, we can see that indeed there is literacy. So we were asking questions, what is open data? And giving different options. So also some kind of tricky questions where someone who would think they know what open data is could fall into. And with those companies that answered the question, they seem really have a high level of literacy. Take it with a grain of salt, because they voluntarily chose to answer to an open data survey, while 2,500 other companies did not, only 3 of them. So our knowledge into the general state in organizations and in businesses is still limited. I mean, we have a lot of experience from talking to them and writing use cases, but we still don't have a holistic overview about what the actual situation is. So this would be something for my utopian wish of a 3-year, 200 people survey. I hope that answered your question as good as we can make it. Thank you, Matteo.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you want to add something?
No, I think you covered it. You covered it quite well.
All right.
Then I open the floor to additional questions.
Anyone else having questions? So curious to hear what your thoughts are. Maybe not even a question, but just thoughts or comments that you would like to voice, or what are your experiences?
Maybe an answer to the question Alina asked us: what should we research next? What do you think is important next? But I must say, I can understand that this topic is overwhelming. Okay. It's wide and broad.
But if not, then we can go to my last one, which are from this massive research and from this very in-depth, for one, presentation and my grilling questions, what are the key takeaways for the audience with everything around economic impact of open data and creating value and opportunities in Europe and beyond?
Beyond those 7 on the screen.
Beyond the 7 still shown on the screen.
Yeah, I think the 7 kind of cover it. I think, let's say for me personally, I was so surprised by how big this potential impact at least is. And it still kind of baffles me that we're not, I would like to be more further into the road of getting there. And I am so happy that there's so many different initiatives that work towards it, and I think we should have that picked up even more. And I think we're already like pushing that a lot, but I'm also really curious to see how that develops. What did you want to know?
Well, for me, beyond what we learned in the 7 key learnings, and also some of the struggle that we had with researching, and what I just shared with the survey, for example, there were more. For me, I'm always thinking, okay, what is the strategy in a more general way? So should we focus a lot on policies? And well, I'm a strong believer in that. But in the time of writing the report, I became more aware of the individual side of it. So I'm working with open data for years now, and I asked myself, how often have I actually worked with open data? Am I making use of the great open data applications that are there? I mean, I know them, I promote them, but have I ever talked with my family, for example, about it? Have I given advice to any of my colleagues that don't work with open data to use it more? And yes, of course I did, because I became a huge fan, but there's way more on an individual level to do. So how can we promote open data, not just via the official channels, but also just with the people around us? And I think here the private sector plays a crucial role. So how can we, on a small individual scale, start changing our ways of working, keeping into mind that we can use open data and shared data as new ways of working, new ways of getting information, making decisions. So I believe, yes, top-down policies are very good here, and I really much like the new Open Data Directive. And at the same time, I believe in bottom-up, let's create or keep the grassroots movement spirit of open data. because this, I think it's highly valuable.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, please feel free, if you do have questions, to email us. Our email is at the very first slide. Yes. So if you have any questions, do please email us or follow us on our Twitter account, European Data Portal, for the latest open data news and trends. Or if you're missing the link to the economic impact report, you can find it very easily on our Twitter page. And we look forward to continuing working with the open data community going forward, and hope to hear more from you as well.
Yes, so please reach out at under the channels that Lena just mentioned, but also you can contact Laura and me, or at least me, on LinkedIn, and I think Laura as well, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. We are present there, so happy if you engage with us in the public discourse or have some questions for us or ideas. I like the question about what's next to research, so let's maybe together think about that and tackle that. And then again, thank you so much for showing your interest and being with us on a Friday afternoon during lunchtime. Much appreciated, and we really enjoyed talking a bit more about what we found out and how we worked, or what we worked on the last month.
Yes, so yeah, also from my side, thanks a lot for your enthusiasm, for your time, taking your time to be here with us. And I hope that we have given you more insight and hopefully even inspired you to think more about the opportunity of the value of open data in Europe. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And thanks, Alina.
My pleasure. And to the audience as well, for those who are interested in going to our website, we are currently also about to reboot the website with a newer version. So if the link does not work and when you wanted to check this report, be aware that it'll become online available soon. In the meantime, happy Open Data Day.
Exactly. Happy Open Data Day tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.